When the Legends Die, Chapter 10. Spring came again. The snow melted, the streams flooded, the aspens were in catkin, then in leaf. The deer came back to the upper benches and dropped their fawns. Strawberries made the grass white with blossoms, and red anemones were in bloom. The boy caught trout in the pools. He watched for his friend, the she-bear. He saw his friend one morning in a wild meadow, eating grass and strawberries. She had 2 cubs with her. He watched her and he talked to her, but she did not listen. A she-bear with cubs is not friendly. He talked to her and walked toward her, and she shook her head and growled and told him she did not want to talk. She did not even want to listen. Her cubs listened, curious about this boy, but she cuffed them and hurried them away and into the brush. For days he watched them. He found where the she-bear ate grass and strawberries, where she caught fish, where she dug for mice and ground squirrels. He found where she slept with her cubs, but she would not listen to him. They were no longer friends. One day he said to the cubs, "I am Bear Brother. You are my brother, and you are my sister." But the she-bear growled and came toward him and told him to go away. He went back to the lodge and made friends of the squirrels that lived in the hollow pine tree. He talked to them and they listened to him. They came and sat in his hand and talked to him. Then the chipmunks that lived in the rocks came to him and asked to be friends. They came into the lodge and lived with him. A jay came and said it wanted to be his friend. It ate from his hand and rode on his shoulder and pecked at the lobe of his ear. Service berries ripened, and he went to gather them to dry, as he had learned from his mother. Among the berry bushes he met the she-bear again and her 2 cubs. He told her he was gathering berries to dry for the winter, and she let him gather berries, but she would not listen when he talked to her. When he talked to the cubs, she took them with her to another berry patch. He gathered berries and dried them, and he made meat and smoked it, as he had learned from his mother. Then the man came. The boy was fishing, and his friend the jay was perched in the aspen nearby watching. The jay called in alarm. It said a stranger was coming. The boy drew in his line, took the fish he had caught, covered his tracks, and left the pool. He went up the hillside and sat in the brush and watched. The jay flew down the valley screaming, and it came back, tree by tree, telling the boy about this stranger. Then the man appeared with his mouse-colored burro. He came up the creek and stopped at the pool where the boy had been fishing. He drank, and his burro drank, and the man picked up a handful of sand from the shallow water and looked at it. He was a tall man. He had gray whiskers, and he wore a black hat and a blue shirt and brown pants and boots. He carried a rifle. His burro wore a pack saddle and a pack covered with gray canvas. The man looked at the sand in his fingers and let the water trickle between his fingers. He shook his head and threw the sand back into the water. Then he spoke to the burro and went on up the creek. The burro followed him. The jay flew back to the boy and sat on his shoulder and was silent. The boy followed the man and watched him all afternoon. The man went slowly, scooping a handful of sand from every pool and looking at it. Toward evening he found a handful of sand that seemed to please him. He took a pan and shovel from the pack on the burro and scooped sand into the pan and put water in it and slowly swished the water and sand out. He rubbed his fingers at the bottom of the pan and put sand in the pan and swished it out again. He did this several times. Then he unpacked the burro and made camp beside the stream. He had found something there that he wanted. The boy watched until the sun sat on the mountains and the man built a fire and set food to cook. Then the boy started back to his own lodge. On the way he met the she-bear and her cubs. He tried to tell her about this strange man, but she did not want to listen. She told him not to talk to her. The cubs wanted to listen, but she cuffed them and told them not to listen. The jay sat in the scrub oak and told her these things, but she would not listen to the jay either. She took her cubs and went away, and the boy went to his lodge and ate and slept. The next morning the boy was halfway to his watching place above the man's camp when he heard the thunder of a gun. He knew that sound because after his mother died, he had got out his father's rifle and fired it by mistake. It made a sound that seemed to lift the roof from the lodge. He put the rifle away and never touched it again. But after that he knew the voice of a gun. He heard it 3 more times, all from the man's camp. Then there was silence. He did not hurry. What had happened and could not be changed. But soon he heard the man shouting anger words. Then the boy reached his watching place and saw the man at the creek, his left arm red with blood from his neck to his fingers. He was trying to wash the blood away, and he was still shouting. The boy knew some of the words. His father had spoken these words when he was angry. The man washed his arms, but could not stop the blood. He came back to his camp, and then the boy saw the she-bear. She was a grizzled brown heap beside the man's fire, which was still burning. She was dead. The man walked around her, afraid even though she was dead. He tore a shirt into strips and wrapped them around his arm, but they were red with blood before he finished the wrapping. The man's talk became fear talk. He tied a strip of cloth round his arm and put a stick in it and twisted the stick, but the blood still ran from his fingers. The man kicked the coffee pot, which sat steaming in the fire, and it rolled on the she-bear, spilling the wet brown stain on her fur. Then he went to his burro, grazing a little way upstream, and tried to lead the burro back to his camp. The burro was afraid of the bear and braced its legs. He went back to the camp, picked up his folded blanket and his rifle. He put the blanket on the burro's back, and he was so weak he almost fell before he got on the burro. His feet were close to the ground. The burro was so small, but he kicked the burro's ribs and shouted and beat the burro's ribs with his gun. The burro went around the bear and went down the valley at a slow trot. The boy waited, listening to the man's voice thin away in the distance. He wondered if the man was singing his song for going on the long journey. He knew it was a fierce song. The man had killed the she-bear. Now he was afraid the she-bear was going to kill him. When the distance had swallowed the man's voice, the boy went down to the camp. He looked at the dead she-bear, and he saw the dead cub beside her. It was the smaller of the two cubs, the female. He said the song for a dead bear. Then he looked at the tracks, the signs, and knew what had happened. The she-bear and her cubs had been on the hillside near his watching place. They had smelled the food the man was cooking. The cubs had gone down to the camp, and the man had tried to drive them away. He had shot one cub. The she-bear had charged him, and he had shot her 3 times. Before she died, she reached him with one angry paw and slashed down his arm. That was what happened. He looked for the other cub. It was nowhere in sight. He looked at the gear the man had left. It was of no use to him, the shovel, the battered coffee pot, the frying pan. Then he heard the other bear cub crying in the brush beyond the creek. He went there and found it, and he talked to it until it was not afraid of him. It went with him down to the man's camp and cried when it nosed at the dead she-bear. She talked to it again, and he fed it the food the man had been cooking. Then he started back to his lodge. He told the bear cub to come with him, and it came. And that is how the boy and the bear cub became brothers and friends. That is how it happened. After that, the boy was not alone.